Does this work? Is that on? Is that on? Is that a classic question? We're not quite there, Mick. Yeah, you might as well put me up a little bit. No need to stop talking. I just wanted to say we put these out, but we put them where you might not have seen them. We recognize that the great room, which is truly a great room, can get a little stuffy as people sit there. So we have a variety of Ted Nelson fans for his fans. So we're just going to quickly hand those out so you can feel a little refreshed. My name's Jason. We'll be starting pretty soon. That is excellent. Okay. All right. Well, hello, thank you. Welcome to everyone for Ted Nelson's many fans. It's the only time I'll do that joke. My name's Jason Scott. I work at the Internet Archive as a free-range archivist. I was asked... So I was asked to be one of the people for this wonderful event, which is Ted Nelson's 80th birthday party, and we'll be bringing him out very shortly. I was asked to make sure that your cell phones are off and that you can of course take pictures because we're all beautiful up here, but you don't have cell phones down. Let's see. I want to see if I can actually do these magical words. Mr. Nelson, are you available to come in the room? We're fighting a very large amount of sound over there. I could also just summon him by walking over. You want to do it? Yeah. Ted, 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 Ted. Oh, okay. This is the befitting dignity of a man of a life well lived. All right. Did they? Oh, it's like that. Hello, sir. So, as I recall, what we're going to do, I think, is we're going to have me. Or are we going to do it like? Are we going to do?
You're going to introduce us, and then we'll come on.
And then you'll come on. I'm giving a speech, though.
You're
right?
giving a speech. Then Mark is doing a speech, and then we'll come on.
Okay, that's my paper. Wow, I like that. How many people here would call themselves a friend or close friend of Ted's? I just want to understand which crowd we're here. How many people here have read about Ted and can't believe they get to be in the room with him? That's a good set. Okay, wait, don't Venn diagram this to me, okay? All right. Excellent, awesome, wonderful. So I was asked by Ted to come out and speak just at the beginning of this little soiree, this simple little event, and I'm going to do so and just quickly talk about what Ted means to me and my interactions with him over the past bit of time. I'm sure some people will nod their heads in the interaction, and then, again, we'll have Mark talk about things involving Ted, and then we'll have Ted. So it all works out in the end, okay? So spoiler alert, Ted gets here. So, louder? Yes. Yes, boss. All right. All right, so here's the deal with me, okay? So I first met Ted in London in 2006. And the reason I met Ted in London was because there was a conference whose name I won't give just out of politeness that had this reputation. It was 5 days long, 4 days of useful, interesting things, and then what was called Seminar Day, where they would have people speak. And they weren't very interesting. And over the course of the years, perhaps decades of this thing going on, it was thought, just book your flight for Thursday. Don't go to Friday. And so a man named Jeffrey Bilder was hired or asked, could you do something to make people stick around on Friday? And so what he did was he put together a speaking roster of controversial or loudmouth characters. And so there were multiple cool, wonderful people. Lib Scrat spoke, and there were other people who spoke about aspects of publishing. They asked me to speak. At the time, I was criticizing Wikipedia pretty heavily. So they said, here, let's go have this guy punch Wikipedia in the face for 30 minutes. And also they had Ted Nelson, the great Ted Nelson, come and speak. And I spoke about halfway through the event, and for every single person who talked, Ted Nelson would interrupt them and correct them. Every single person was getting that. So when I got up to speak, I was so happy that he had only interrupted me once. And it was to tell me that Wikipedia had his birth date but not his death date right. And it was great, right? So this caused me to enter into a world which other people I'm sure have entered who know him, where we hung out afterwards and he said a lot of contrarian, crazy things. And I just remember the phrasing he used. This is when he would use the phrase of referring to the World Wide Web, this great achieved dream, as a honky-tonk nightmare. And it just stuck with me in my head. And then the theme of drawing, in the theme of like drawing parallels and where did it come first and so on that I've had Ted do over the years, that phrasing and that approach in his speaking stuck with me enough that in 2011, I was asked to speak, or I got to speak at an event here at the archive, the first time I'd ever set foot in the building. And I patterned some of how I gave my speech over how Ted gives his speech. So I said that the qualities, the virtues of an archivist are rage, paranoia, and kleptomania. And it was very well received, and I immediately went downstairs, demanded a job, and here I am. So I will credit Ted for my job. I will do that absolutely. And so Ted and I, 5 years after I met him randomly in London, had suddenly become co-working buddies. We were kind of working at the same place, kind of. We were kind of hanging out, doing things, you know. We were kind of working around. And I really love engaging with people. So I'd have a lot of friends come over to the archive. I love doing that. I love inviting people over to Brewster's house and hanging out and doing stuff and going, look at this room, this is ludicrous, and having fun. And nothing's creepier than this room at night, I'll tell you. And you just take people in, you don't tell them, and they're just like, ah! And I am surprised that this one statue with the baby has not been punched in once in the last 5 years by somebody just, oh my God! So often Ted works at night. And you can imagine how people would respond when they would be hanging out with me and I'd be like, yeah, I'm working on this. And they're like, who's that? And I'm like, oh, it's Ted Nelson. And they'd be like, the Ted Nelson, which should be his official honorific, the Ted Nelson. And so I go, yeah, hey, you want to go say hi to Ted Nelson? And Ted was always gracious about like, hi, this person is 1/10 your age and he would like to know about what you're up to. And Ted would always engage them in a speech. And the speech, the presentation, was about his dream and what he was trying to achieve all of his life. And when it came to information, interlinking, referencing each other, putting a bridge between them, right? Building up documents that would interlink and intertwingle that we would benefit from. And it's a dream he believes in strongly, and he continues to believe it to this very second behind this door. And that sort of inspiration for those documents, which I think should just be called Nelson documents, I would watch over and over as he spent 40 minutes talking to a person who 2 minutes ago didn't know they were going to get into this. And they would be rapt attention. Like it was like Aristotle was like, oh, you want to talk about philosophy? Here we go. And just both his energy in doing this is something that I've seen now for 5 years of just watching him acting as if each new person is the VC that's going to pitch and support his idea. Treats everybody equally. Nobody is beneath getting this idea because his ideas weren't above anybody. He wanted everybody to experience this. You know, the thing about like Xanadu and his work with Zigzag and everything else is that they are basically unpacking the world in a different way. And his work in it and his continued work in it is one of saying, okay, I mean, we have this beta out there, it's kind of nice, we call it the World Wide Web, everybody invests in it, people use it to drive around in cars, but we don't have to stay with this. This can be like a temporary experiment before we get to the real work. And I think that positive attitude of his is just super inspiring. And again, it's built from this real love of information and interaction, and it's just a pleasure to watch it go down. Okay, so our relationship changed slightly this year because I've been visiting Ted once a week through the summer and helping him go through his shipping containers. And Ted will claim that they are a horrifying hoard he doesn't want anyone to know about. This is the most exquisitely filed, identifiable hoard you've ever seen. It's a library that he has in containers of his life where he can look at the front of the box and tell you where he was doing it, what it's about, and what the contents are. And we've just been going through and cleaning out what's coming and what's going, and it's you know, so it's nice to see, it's nice to have spent the summer inside of Ted's brain, which is where I've been. So it's been a wonderful experience. So I've been there, you know, like I said, once a week for about 8 hours, and we've just been cleaning up things and preparing them, because he's realistic that he'll live 8 minutes or 30 more years. Why not prepare for both? So, and it's like I said, it's just been inspiring to kind of walk through everything and then get to know Lauren and get to know, you know, his home in New Jersey, and it's just a fantastic place. So I feel very close to him, which I think is why he asked me to fly out here to come out and talk about him. I love this guy. It's funny to get a grandparent I didn't know I was going to get, who is amazing. A grandfather I always wished I'd had in that way. And he's so smart, so intelligent, so wonderful. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that soon. I'm going to mention one last thing. While cleaning out his containers, we had boxes of things we were throwing out, just magazines and so on. And among them were things labeled unsorted junk mail. And so the unsorted junk mail were boxes of just junk mail he'd had and kind of thrown them into a box and forgotten about them, and they were sitting there. They are amazing, okay? They are stunning. And the reason why, and this is, I just want to file this back because this is to me the heart of Ted's personality, is he was young, he was a consultant, an engineer, a philosopher, a filmmaker, a publisher. He was all these things in his early 20s. He had no idea which he wanted to be, so why not prepare for all of them? So he wrote to film camera companies, to aerospace companies, computer companies, electronic companies, plastics, manufacturing, laboratory equipment, and said, hey, what are you guys working on? And got it all back from them and collected it. And so he wanted to throw them out because it turns out he did not go into aerospace, plastics, filmmaking. And I said I'd like to have them. And he let me have them. And we have been scanning them. And so it's on the thing, it's called Ted Nelson's Junk Folders. It's up to several hundred objects. We have 13 boxes of it going to the scanners. It's being funded by volunteers, and they're doing, or people are contributing money, so we're actually paying a person to scan it to be more accurate. And we are just adding amazing, and I mean, people are, when they run into this, they are stunned by pristine editions of 1965 furniture or 1968 aerospace cameras, self-running stabilizer. It's like an insight into the engineering, the aesthetics, the design, the beauty, the hopes, the dreams of what it is to live in this world and find out what's there. And to me, ironically, this junk mail embodies Ted perfectly for me, absolutely perfectly. So I just want to make that, you know, why not end it with junk mail? What a great touching. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, and I want to introduce Mark Graham, who is my coworker at the archive, and he's going to talk with you a little bit about some of the things specifically Ted has done over his long and wonderful life and is looking forward to in times to come.
Thank you, sir. No problem. All right. Welcome here. Welcome to the archive, and happy birthday, Ted. Indeed. The Ted Nelson. And if any of you leave here tonight and think you want a little bit more of Ted Nelson, the YouTube channel is indeed The Ted Nelson. And you can spend dozens of hours learning more about Ted. Ted asked me to speak a little bit tonight about him, about some of his accomplishments, because we all know how humble he is and restrained. But in any case, I'm going to try to fill in a little bit of an overview of some of his accomplishments. Some of the ways that he's affected the world and influenced many of us. Many of you here tonight know Ted. I've known him for a long time, far better than I do. And he could probably stand up here and wax eloquent on any of these subjects. But, you know, Ted's thought about a lot of things first. And he's inspired a lot of people. He's coined a whole number of words. He's invented a few things. And he's told people about a great new world. I'm going to give you a little list of some of the things that Ted has invented, and there's a list up here as well. You could follow into any of them at your leisure. Semantic nets, word processing, personal computing, hypertext, ray tracing, triangle polygon mesh. He foresaw realistic movie effects, a 5-finger keyboard, not like Doug Engelbart's, but one you could actually put in your pocket. Movie editing by a computer, a dynamic braille display, augmented reality, and he was the first to envision multi-purpose personal computers around 1967. So pretty long list of accomplishments. He also, by the way, kind of is responsible for creating 2 whole new fields of studies: the human-computer interface, HCI, and hypertext, which is a field of study in and of itself, of course. So what does TED stand for? And this is present tense. This is an ongoing process. He stands for freedom, privacy, creativity, and understanding. Ted is a humanist. Ted thought that it's really not about a technology revolution, but rather is a requirement that we develop some technology to foster a humanist revolution. He stood for new forms of writing and of education, of non-hierarchical ways of structuring, and fundamentally about making people smarter, helping to make people smarter. So where did this come from? Where did this begin? What were some of the early influences on Ted? Maybe, Jason, maybe one of the reasons that Ted is such a wonderful grandfather figure is that he was raised by his grandparents. When he was with them when he was 5, and he remembers at 5 years old being on a rowboat and letting his hand trail into the water and observing the interaction between the water and his hand, and had this realization that the world is a system of ever-changing relationships and structures, and that's been a theme for Ted's life. His mother was an Academy Award-winning actress, Celeste Holm, and his father, Ralph Nelson, was an Emmy-winning director, and Ted could have ended up being a director and going into the movie business, and that was something that he pursued, but he went in other directions. And his parents divorced when he was very young, when he was just a few months old, and he went to live with his grandparents, Gene Park and Theodore Holm. He was actually named after his grandfather because his parents realized that he was going to go live with them. he hated school, at least from kindergarten up until the end of high school. It bored him, and yet he fell in love when he found Swarthmore. And he found that it was a period in his life of intellectual curiosity, and he was stimulated by the people there and the challenges. Early on, he was influenced by Bucky Fuller. And as Bucky encouraged us, many of us, not to narrow down, but kind of keep an open, broad field. And that's what he did, but he did at least focus on media projects. And we have a bunch of them up here. And you know, downstairs, there's a lot of swag. There's some TED swag that you can get, but... So he published a number of magazines, and not your normal kind of magazine, but this is one an example, is a kite-shaped magazine. Mary, I think this is book art, right? Before they were calling it book art. This is the kite edition. This is the phallic edition. That's what it says here. I'm just reading what it says. He acted and he put on plays. He wrote and directed the world's first rock musical, titled Anything and Everything. We've got some examples up here, and CDs available. I put this into iTunes the other night. It didn't recognize the tracks. I added it to Grace Notes. If you do it, you get the tracks now. So he got $700 from the student union to student council to make a film. That was just enough money to make the video version of it, but couldn't do the audio. So he added the audio a little bit later. The title of the film is The Epiphany of Slocum Furlow. Some of you are fans, yeah. I'm a fan too. You know, the epitome of Slocum Furlow, remember this is college days, right? Trying to figure stuff out, is of a brooding young man walking around campus, having conversations with people, asking, what is the meaning of life? And in any case, the fundamental realization is that it's the relationship of the whole to the parts. And that for me, that harkens back to the idea of the hand on the water and the interconnectedness of all things. He entered Harvard in the fall of 1960, where he took a computer course, the first one, and that's where Ted had his own first epiphany. It was about screens. He realized that screens were the future. He realized that the interactive screen would be the new home of the human race, and it was going to be the basis for interactive documents of the future. Nelson docs. His vision of personal computing and of worldwide hypertext came into being, and the fundamental idea of using these tools to help make people smarter is what he began to work on. He created a company. Didn't want to give it any kind of small name, lower expectations. He just called it General Creative, and he was going to use that to pursue his vision. And along the way, he worked with John Lilly down in Santa Cruz, working with dolphins. Once again, trying to establish interconnections, in this case, the interspecies kind. He ended up teaching at Vassar. In 1965, he submitted 5 papers to 5 different conferences. Once he was really trying to put himself out there, he had all these ideas that he wanted the world to recognize them. And he was speaking at the ACM National Conference in Cleveland, giving a presentation, the last 3 slides of which were change, change, change. So he got somebody's attention. I don't know if he was expecting it, but I had dinner with him last week, and I got to hear the long form of this story, but the short version is it was the CIA. And there was a man there from the CIA, and he said, hi, I'm here, and I'd like to give you money to help us. And so Ted went to CIA headquarters, and he walked across the Eagle, and he met with people, and he met with the war between artificial intelligence and hypertext. In any case, for several years, the CIA strung him along. He fought the war and ended up not getting funding by the CIA. Hard to know what would have happened had he. It's probably better that he didn't. And then he went on. In 1966, he found himself as the assistant to the head of a major publishing company in New York. And that was really pivotal because he was then able to help guide this company. And actually, they flew out here to California, and he met with Doug Engelbart. And this was 2 years before Doug gave his demo, the mother of all demos. And it began a lifelong friendship with Doug. It inspired him around thinking about Xanadu. Xanadu, which was his project that he named after the magic place of literary memory from the poem Kubla Khan. And maybe if we're lucky, I don't know if there's going to be time, but maybe Ted will recite that for us tonight. I was talking to him last week, and he's sitting with me, and all of a sudden he just started reciting the Kubla Khan, the whole thing from memory. Then he continued to work on hypertext, got involved in a project at Brown, working to pursue some of the ideas that he had. You know, Ted's not a programmer, not a developer. He's a visionary. He's an artist. He's an inventor. And so he was always looking to team up with people to help bring his ideas into fruition. It was while he was at Brown that he claimed that he invented the back button. So we have him to thank for that. He worked on the hypertext system when he was at Bell Labs. And Bell Labs, this was in a city where Bell Labs had an operation where they may or may not have been working on the missile defense system. And we can't really say, but he was there working on that. In 1970, he started working on HyperTyper. And HyperTyper is a word processing system. And there was a front end for HyperTyper called Jot, Juggler of Text. Some Jot fans out there, and actually, we could have a whole lot of new Jot fans out there because of the work of the Internet Archive, and in particular of Jason. We actually have the Jot software running in an emulator, so you can go search for Jot on archive.org, and you can fire up the Jot system and begin using it just as Ted built it. He worked on ray tracing, which was the foundation of special effects, now used by Pixar and others. In 1973, he was at the University of Illinois, and he wrote the seminal book, Computer Lib. And this was my introduction to Ted. When I started working in this space in the early '80s, and someone gave me this book, and you know, it was like sacred text. Reading this book was a special influence, and it still is. It sold 50,000 copies. It had a big impact out here in the Valley. Steve Wozniak says that it was the Bible for the homebrew computer club, and there's also a 2014 interview with Woz, goes on for about 20 minutes talking about Ted, and he says that Ted is a god. And so if any of you want more Ted tonight and want more Woz, go watch the video. He started a computer company around that time, and so Ted never does things like the normal way, right? So he started a computer company by making a newsletter looking for partners and investors. And this is the brochure. This is the brochure for this computer company. And out in front we have, you might have seen it when you came in here, this picture. Computers arise, and the computer is breaking itself from the shackles there. And this computer company is called Itty Bitty Computer Company, spelled little I, little b, little m. And he claims he got a whole lot of referrals from the other IBM. People would call and say, I'm looking for that like cheap computer, and they'd go, oh yeah, that's that other IBM company. So and then, okay, so then he finds himself in '79 back at Swarthmore, and he's got the dream team with him. There's 6 developers who's working with him on the hypertext system. They figured it was going to take him 9 years to build it, so they called it XU88. Along the way, he was the editor of the Creative Computer magazine. In 1980, he wrote another book called Literary Machines. I don't have a copy of it here, but that was the book where he really outlined Xanadu in all of its glory. And for the next several years, he traveled around the world. He spoke about the grand new world of hypertext. And that got the attention of some people at Autodesk. He was working, of course, with Roger Gregory, who many of you know, and the Xanadu project became actually part of Autodesk. And they worked on it for many years. We'll let Ted explain a little bit more about that. I'll just finish up by saying that he inspired many other people and many other innovations that we now take for granted. He inspired the Apple I. Steve said, not an exaggeration to say that Ted invented our world. Is the Bible of the Computer Lib, right, was the Bible, as I said, of the Homebrew Computer Club. Lotus Notes, the inspired Lotus Notes. Mitch K. Poore said that he is a man who dreamed my dreams before I did. Computer Lib inspired me as no other book before or since. And then, of course, there's the web. That's the topic, frankly, that's way too big for me, a little too hot to handle tonight with Ted, so I'm going to let the man himself address that. We have a tradition here at the Internet Archive. It's called Friday Lunch. I've been coming to Friday lunches for about 20 years, long before I started working here. And we go around, everyone stands up, we say a few words, what we're working on. The staff does that, guests do it as well. There's always guests coming through. You're all invited to Friday lunch. Please RSVP ahead of time, info@archive.org. And every Friday that Ted comes, and Ted comes for many Fridays, he stands up and he says some introduction. So last Friday, here's what Ted said. He said, Ted Nelson, non-standard, case-sensitive, special character. So here he is, the Generalissimo, the ultimate special character, the Ted Nelson.
Hello, world. My fundamental motto is there's too much to say and it goes in all directions. This is the fundamental problem of writing, description, thinking, and philosophy. So I'll try to say a lot in a short time. Thanks to Brewster and to my other Internet Archive friends for this big chance to spend time with you. Not my actual birthday, which was several weeks ago. And thank you, my friends from all over elsewhere, for coming when I haven't got time to chase you down individually. I feel very gruntled. This is a unique chance to talk to you collectively. What shall I talk about? I could start with talking about my software aspirations, but that would be boring. Instead, let me reminisce and ramble. Think of how ideals have driven us through these decades of computerization, always thinking we were building a better world, and always the fascination of the ideas driving us on, and the remarkable people driven by those ideas. So here are a few anecdotes from a long career, including some of the wonderful people I've met. First, the origin story. Well, you just heard it. I'll be quick. As a child, I wanted to be Walt Disney and Frank Lloyd Wright, and, quote, have my own studio, whatever that would mean. This idea has driven me all these years. From childhood, I was a dreaming futurist, thinking we'd have an Art Deco rocket ship world. But I was also from a literary family, and I was always trying radical lifestyle experiments. I was an early adopter of everything. When I was 7 or 8, I saw an ad for something called kangaroo spring shoes. And there were these big springs you would strap on your feet, and I thought I would bound down the street in like 7-league boots, and instead I sprained both ankles immediately, very painfully. And so I did a lot in college. I published my own magazine. Copies are available downstairs. Wrote the first rock musical. Nearly got expelled fighting for sexual freedom. These were the 50s. Ended my college years making a comedy film. So coming out of college, I thought I was a filmmaker, mainly. That was my real talent. I wanted to make movies and to be a generalist. I had hopes of being a, quote, major thinker, a term you heard in those days. I was determined not to narrow down. I thought I would go on with my songwriting and essays on many subjects. This was a bad plan. But it meant I was ready to branch out further. When I took a computer course in 1960 and I saw there would be computer screens, put those together. Dreaming futurist, literature, media savvy, radical lifestyle experiments, early adopter. From all of this came my vision of hypertext. So let's see now. Here's the PDP-1. Here's the PDP-1 that I saw advertised. Somewhere I still have the original brochure, probably maybe Jason has already digitized it, for the PDP-1 that thrilled me so. But all I could find on the web is this picture that doesn't convey the excitement I felt when I saw it 56 years ago. You could put screens on computers and make them interact. Well, it was obvious to me as a media guy, knowing a lot about the history of movies and whatnot, that the computer screen would be the new home of the human race. And eventually, millions would be self-publishing around the world. I wanted to create the documents I imagined for these screens, believing myself uniquely qualified. So there's a special kind of document I wanted to create since then. Jason has suggested a name I dare not speak, for documents with visible bridges to sources, identities, and connections that people make. And I wasn't going to narrow down. I thought I would create the first personal computer company. I would call it the General Creative Corporation, like General Electric and General Dynamics. I was going to be the figurehead and chief designer. In other words, I invented Steve Jobs, but too early. Well, I didn't get to found personal computing or worldwide hypertext, but I sure tried. I started telling everybody about my ideas, and they generally thought I was crazy. The first person I talked to about my ideas was Isaac Asimov. And I said to him, this was at a party given by, lost my place here. Yeah, so this was a party given by John W. Campbell, the editor of Astounding in Cambridge, Mass. There were just a few people there, myself, Asimov, Hal Clement, and a couple of others, Mrs. Campbell. At one point I went to Asimov and I said, Mr. Asimov, soon we'll be reading and writing on computer screens. And the great futurist sneered, yeah, sure. But I knew I was right. I had a lot of hubris.
Oh, you don't say, Ted.
You may remember a song in the 1970s. Well, you're so vain, you probably think this song is about you. Well, I actually did think this song was about me because I had dated Carly Simon while she was still at Newsweek. Wonderful person. I believe I gave her the title of one of her songs, which was These Are the Good Old Days. So, then, but she may have thought I was vain. She still refuses to identify the party she was singing about, so I consider myself to be still in the running.
Oh, that's our Ted.
It's a kind of epi-para-meta honor. Okay. John Mauchly. John Mauchly, the man who led the secret development of the ENIAC computer during World War II. He was a wonderful guy, warm and enthusiastic. We became quite close in his late days. I interviewed him on tape for a possible autobiography or biography, but he could not stick to a subject or finish a story. I wondered how he could possibly have run such a project. But then I went to his memorial service, and they were all there. The kids who had worked for him during the war, now middle-aged, but as sharp as could be. And then I understood what he had done. He had inspired them, and they had done the work. Mauchly also told me about a little problem of credit. Do you remember the von Neumann machine, where programs and data were going to share the same memory? Mauchly said von Neumann stole that idea. Mauchly's group was under military secrecy, but his group was instructed to tell von Neumann everything. So they told von Neumann their plan to put the data in the program in the same memory, and he published it and got the credit, and so a computer with only one memory is called a von Neumann machine. Mauchly was still very annoyed about it 30 years later. Douglas Engelbart. And there's some pictures downstairs, if you got the card-sized pictures, of Doug with wings and a halo that Marlene, my wife, took. It was just a still from a movie that we happened to see, but unretouched. Many of you know about Douglas Engelbart, one of the greatest men of the modern world, much of which he invented.